episode of the Topical Minds podcast. If you are enjoying the show, the content, please make sure that you support the show by liking, by sharing, and by subscribing. It would mean a lot. Okay, so let's get into this episode. I've got my really good friend Ed East on the show today. He is the founder and CEO of Billion Dollar Boy, which is one of the fastest growing influencer marketing agencies in the world. Since its inception in 2014, the agency has seen rapid double-digit growth year over year, and so I'm extremely excited to have somebody who is knowledgeable in an extremely fast growing area on the show today. Ed actually was one of my friends in the undergraduate program. We both went to the University of Virginia. And at the time, we had both sort of discussed starting our own ventures. Of course, Ed ended up doing that. And so, wanted to get him on and get his take on his journey, as well as, of course, like his thoughts on the whole influencer marketing space, which I'm sure if you're not aware of at the end of this podcast, you will be aware of. So, Ed, thank you very much for being on. I know we briefly spoke the other day, catching up after a while, but I'm extremely happy to have you on, and I'm extremely happy to have you share your journey and how it's been for you. I can imagine this ride must have been quite the ride for you.
Definitely. And it's great. Hey, great to catch up. So nice to see you. I think it's been pretty exciting journey, especially since leaving UVA, which I'm sure we both miss lots and lots. But yeah, I'm here to answer any questions you have and sort of talk you through BDB and the world of entrepreneurship, which has its ups and downs nonstop. You'll never believe it.
So let's start with what actually inspired you to get into to become an entrepreneur. Of course, like growing up, a lot of us, I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of us have the desire to start our own businesses and do our own thing. What inspired you to get into this particular space of influencer marketing and just start your own venture to begin with?
Yeah, so I think probably it was family. And that sort of the support of family and seeing them build their own businesses. So pretty much all of my family members in some way or another have started their own businesses. From my mother, my sister, my brother and father, they've all done it. And quite often my father and sister and mother are all in entertainment, film, theatre and television. And my brother, he started an environmentally friendly private hire service in London called Green Tomato Cars. And so having seen them all do it, it makes you realize it's possible. And ultimately, I think that network around you, whether those are friends, family, or other people that you're just acquaintances, seeing them build businesses and take that risk to try it, it's inspiring. And I think is one big element of why you start a business. So ultimately, I'm sure it's family. And I had a passion since a young age to try selling things, buying things for one and selling them for two, whether that was selling tuck at school, or I'm sure there was some sort of thing I tried to sell you at university, probably unsuccessfully. And then years later, I was working in Los Angeles, and the influencer marketing industry was just beginning. And I could see there were companies which were known as multi-channel networks on the West Coast of America, which were becoming really quite successful. And they were helping YouTubers monetize their audiences by doing brand deals and also helping them produce better quality content and taking a revenue share on the revenue that YouTube would pay them. And while that was happening, I was running my own blog and realized that probably running a blog wasn't for me, but actually trying to connect bloggers to brands was an interesting avenue, and getting brands to play bloggers brand deals. But as it was really YouTubers that were having success, we pivoted and we built a business inspired by this sort of YouTube phenomenon. Yeah. And obviously it's evolved a lot since then, which we can go into as well.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, and that leads, I have a ton of questions that come out of that. But so you see your family members and you're like, everybody's doing this and they seem to be successful doing this, and it gave you this added inspiration, this motivation, and you decided to start your own business. How did you come up with the name?
The name? Yes, everyone always likes to ask that.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually just before university.
Yeah.
I was actually trying to learn how to build websites,
Yeah.
and I came across a charity called Rainforest Concern, and I helped build a website to get donations to help sponsor parts of the rainforest in the Amazon. And basically, it was a website that was split into thousands of little squares. It was called Color It Green, and people could buy one of those squares on the site.
Yeah.
And the sort of image in the background was a picture of the world, and it would color one of those squares green. And the idea was to color the whole thing green, and you would buy one of those squares for $100. And when someone would scroll their mouse over the square, it would pop up with the name of the person who had made that donation. So you could buy a whole chunk, for example, and it would be a bigger thing dedicated to you. So that was raising money for Rainforest Concern. And while I was building that site, among other things in that sort of area, I listened to a lot of music, and Pharrell was really pretty, like, he was the guy at the time, and he had the band NERD. That was like what his main thing was.
Yeah.
But then he released a single with Snoop Dogg called Beautiful.
Right.
And I looked up Pharrell and just thought he was pretty inspirational, a really amazing person. And his music, I loved his music. And he has a fashion label called Billionaire Boys Club.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So while setting up these websites, I realized there were marketplaces for buying and selling domain names. And it kind of gave me this idea that Pharrell would almost definitely want to be the $1 billion boy. And I think it's really quite an appropriate name for him. It would just work so well.
Right.
That, could be his domain name. So I bought it with the hope that I'd sell it to Pharrell. And years later, that was 2005. So 9 years later, I still obviously hadn't sold it to Pharrell. And when we started the business, it's quite hard finding a domain name, a company name, a trademark, all those things that are available.
Right.
And we test, we tried to come up with some of our own names. And actually one day, with my other two co-founders, I just said, look, I do actually own this domain name, $1 Billion Boy. Why don't we use that? And it was quite appropriate because when we started this business, we were trying to think of an angle that could differentiate us from the other businesses which were also starting at the time.
Yeah.
And we began by specializing in talking to male audiences. So
gotcha.
$1 Billion Boy had a perfect association with that.
Right.
But obviously we've moved away from that as we've grown. But that was a hook and a way for us to get through the door to the brands, and everyone was knocking on their door, but no one was knocking on the door saying we'll target male audiences. Primarily, most of the people reaching out to the brands were saying, especially the beauty companies that we were talking to, were saying, would like to reach female audiences. Sorry, long-winded way, but there you go. That's why we chose the name.
Right. So you were focusing on a niche, but then you decided that, with the growth of the market, it made sense for you to explore other areas of the market. It is
100%. 100%, yeah.
It is a very catchy name, though. Like when you do hear it, you're like, ooh, like what do these guys do? Like, what's this organization about? So it does sort of pique your interest a little bit. For those who don't know, what exactly is influencer marketing? Like, what's sort of the 101 on influencer marketing?
101 on influencer marketing. I mean, it's at a very interesting stage in its evolution.
Yeah.
And sort of the origin, I guess, where did influence come from? Like the origin of influence. Influence actually means the capacity to have an effect on the behavior of someone. To be fair, that's existed since the dawn of communications between humans.
Yeah.
And, you could probably recognize a plethora of examples, well, we could from our own lives. The word of mouth advice from our parents, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, all the way through to culture, and especially the leading influence of politicians, celebrities, publications, and more. And obviously with the advent of sort of the internet and then subsequently modern day social media, this meant we entered a new chapter, and influence and influencers are that the social media has democratized access to large swathes of people and enabling arguably already influential people within their own offline social networks to reach a far greater one online. And so social media networks have now provided everyone with the tools to become self-publishing powerhouses with their own editorial voice. Those people are able to amass followers, vary from sort of traditional celebrities to previously unknown personalities, artists, and businesses. And influencers, they're sort of individuals who regularly post content that resonates with their audience. They're built up a reputation for their knowledge and expertise on their topic of choice, and amass followers as a result. So, anyone really can be an influencer, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what we think of as an influencer.
Yeah, and essentially, like the way it would work, I would imagine, is we've got. I think there's a few different setups in the world of influencer marketing, right? Like brands
Sure.
can go directly to influencers, or brands can ultimately reach out to an agency like yourselves that
Mm-hmm.
specializes in connecting the right influencers with the right type of brands, right? Or making sure that
Exactly.
the brands are using the right influencers for the message that they are looking to get across to their audience. Um,
Yes.
so in that space, I would imagine that there has been an evolution itself. Have you seen like a number of agencies come up since so your agency was one of the first to actually take a spot in the UK, right? And then I would imagine since you guys came along that there were probably other companies who've followed your model or who've tried to do the same stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's exploded, the industry.
Yeah,
I think, it was worth something like 2 billion 4 years ago. And next year it could be worth up to 15 billion total
yeah,
spend on influencers. So you can see it's growing rapidly.
yeah,
Um, and with that means lots of new entrants to the market, not necessarily competition. Our competition comes from the existing entrants, the ones who have grown to the size that we're at, and of which there really aren't that many around the world. So it's quite exciting because we're right at sort of the peak of the market. No, sorry. We are one of the the market has not reached a peak.
yeah,
There's a lot of room for growth, and
yeah.
I think but we are one of those top options if you're choosing an agency to work with, and we all have our own individual qualities.
Yeah. Um,
So the market's going to continue growing for a long time, and I think the influencer marketing is the term that's defined the industry we work in. There's a new term being used, and I love it, and it's the creator economy.
hmm,
Really, what's happening is sort of the production of content's been democratized.
hmm,
So it previously used to be 100 production agencies in the U. I mean, I'm generalizing, but let's say 100 production companies in the UK that you could go to.
yeah,
Now you can go to thousands. With the rise in the advance of technology, that's allowed individuals to produce content of a very high quality very easily. And social media is then the way that they can get the content out.
right.
So in the same way that Uber has democratized, let's say, travel, or Airbnb has democratized accommodation,
Yep.
this influencer, not Billion Dollar Boy, we're part of that. The influencer as a sector has democratized the production of content. So it's really revolutionizing advertising. So it's not disappearing. The logic of the model makes so much sense. It's quicker, it's faster, better quality, and it's far more cost effective than traditional ways of producing content. So the term influencer, that may
Yeah.
disappear over time, but the model will not.
So I would imagine that this new way of creating content, I would imagine that it presents influencers with additional revenue streams, right? Like
Definitely.
people people will be like, I could just create really good content and then somehow use this to make a living for myself. When you think of like the world of influencers, and I'm very new to it, but like I was doing like a search the other day, and I was like, okay, so there's like micro influencers who have a certain
Mm-hmm.
number of followers, and then you have, beyond that, you've got sort of the macro influencers who have more followers, and then you've got the celebrities who, of course, have a massive following. But
Mm-hmm.
would it be fair to say that brands try and tap into the different levels of influencers? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, 100%, and for different reasons. So earlier today, I was on a presentation to a brand,
Yeah.
um, and they had a few different objectives. And in their case, they were really hoping to reach a wide audience in the
Right.
UK. So, in the simplest way, you could think of you could use a budget in two ways. One, to drive mass awareness,
Yeah.
and then two, to create a lot of content and quality content. So if you wanted to use your budget wisely to drive mass awareness, which is just, this is a very simple way of considering objectives and how you could swing one direction or the other.
Yeah.
Um, you would probably use far fewer influencers and bigger influencers, and you'll get more bang for your buck from the influencers when it comes to cost per engagement and CPM. And also the time that it takes for the team to actually manage that relationship and get the production and make it all happen. You'll also spend less money on agency fees. So you can put more investment into the media or into the influencer to get more.
Right.
If, however, you want lots of content, and maybe you want lots of content because that content that you're then going to run in paid media ads on Facebook. So you want a whole variety of content, so you can test it and then double down on what works and what doesn't. Then that would be a reason for wanting lots of content, or you want lots of content to live on your websites or on your social media feeds, that kind of thing. Then in that case, it requires a lot more management time. So agency fees rise, and also influencers at smaller level typically charge more than you get less bang for your buck as you get smaller. It's like
Right.
as economies of scale bring you better cost per engagement and better CPMs.
But
so is that one? Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, but like, wouldn't you expect like a micro influencer who doesn't have as many followers as a big celebrity for them to perhaps charge you a smaller fee to engage with them?
Yes. So sorry, the amount. So a smaller influencer could charge $500.
Yeah.
And a much larger influencer could charge $20,000.
Yeah.
But let's say the larger influencer drives 1 million engagements for that $20,000.
Right. So it's the
smaller influencer could 500 may just drive 100 engagements.
Gotcha.
So your actual cost per engagement is far more expensive with the smaller one than it is with the larger.
Gotcha.
But yes, you need a bigger budget to be able to invest into the bigger ones.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But the micro influencers are being leveraged, right? Like depending on what it is that the brands are looking to drive. Yeah.
Yeah. So as example, they could be using them to drive the creation of lots of content. And I'm making it I'm giving a really simple example.
Yeah.
But yes, so they have different purposes. Very different purposes, and quite often a combined approach could be best.
And when you're creating content, is the content created solely by the influencers, or is the agency also creating content and then the influencers are leveraging that? Like, how does the model work? Is it both ways, or?
I mean, look, different agencies do it different ways. I'd say the sort of traditional way of doing influencer marketing is you brief the talent you give them an inspirational brief, a creative idea, for them to then take and create off the back of.
Gotcha.
And they create something that feels correct for them, and thus will speak to their audience in the most authentic manner. But there are other instances where people create content and give it to influencers to distribute on their channels, which is another way of getting the word out there for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things you had mentioned earlier is you were trying to, when you initially got into it, you were trying to monetize influencers who used the YouTube platform, just because they were the ones who were being able to monetize their content at the time. But of course now, like off late, we've started to see certain platforms see tremendous growth in the number of users, so TikTok being one of them. Yeah. Right? Like, do you see some of these platforms perhaps like dominating the space, or either, influencers who aren't necessarily on YouTube and Instagram, but who are massive on platforms like TikTok? Like, would you say, those influencers getting more preference from brands? Where do you see that going?
So there's definitely a huge amount of competition between these platforms now to attract the most popular, most talented content creators. Because ultimately, just like you choose a certain TV channel for your favorite TV show, you're going to choose a certain platform to find your favorite content. And you'll see that platforms like YouTube and Twitch are competing to sign up exclusively online gamers to be on their platform. Now, quite often though, influencers, especially like, let's say not gamers, they will publish content across all their channels, but they'll usually have a preferred channel, and that will be their top one. TikTok has exploded in the last 2 years. It's become very, very popular. Influencer marketing for us was always the backbone of Instagram was always the backbone of most of our influencer marketing. TikTok has risen. We do a lot of work on Pinterest, on YouTube, and other platforms like loads on TikTok now as well. So I think they all serve a purpose, but the sort of the breakout platform for us over the last couple of years has been TikTok, and for good reason. It's fun. It's just so much fun as a platform.
Yeah, and I think I would imagine the format of it works too, right? Like you can post up to a 3 minute long video, which I think is great for I would imagine brands to get straight to the point, right? Like you've got shorter videos that you can post as well. I think the platform works well just because you can in that 3 minute time frame, or in that 30-second time frame, or in that 1 minute time frame, you can really do a really good job in communicating your message and rapidly seeing a ton of views. I mean, I don't know how the algorithm works, but you're starting to see, even just over here, like in Ontario, you're starting to see a lot of individuals who wouldn't necessarily be on TikTok use it as a platform to engage with their audiences. You see, we're starting to see a few politicians on it. We're starting to see a lot of people use it to their benefit, and they seem to be generating a lot of interest and a lot of views through that. So I would imagine it would continue to grow in its popularity.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Coming back to Pinterest, is I would imagine that has a specific niche audience, right? Like it's used for what exactly is that? Is Pinterest used for? Is that used for like recipes and is that sort of the main focus there? Is people post their recipes and they post their. I think I was reading that somewhere, but I could be wrong. I don't know what it's used for now.
Pinterest, yeah, I mean, if you haven't tried it, it's like an image sharing. It's an image sharing platform.
Yeah.
And it's become incredibly popular. My wife, okay, for example, my wife uses it to build up collections of interior inspiration for her. You could use it for recipes. It covers all different spectrums, but it's all about that sort of visual appearance, and it's all image based, and you create these pin boards of content similar to like when you used to have pin boards at home,
Yeah.
So it's whatever takes your fancy, but it's incredibly popular. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it's certainly, and they're investing a lot in trying to, again, like the other platforms, pull creators into their platform.
Right. I want to go back to your journey starting off. Oftentimes, when you are starting a venture, you tend to encounter certain challenges, right? Some of them you sort of plan for, and some of them you don't necessarily plan for. What were there any challenges that you faced as you were starting your business, and as you continue to see that rapid growth? Were there certain challenges that you encountered that you weren't necessarily prepared for?
All the time. All the time. And I think what ends up making your business valuable is that you've been through those challenges and you've addressed them. And people who are then starting their own businesses have to go through that too, so it's going to take them time to sort of catch up. So early on, I think, and it's still is a conversation, cash flow is that idea of cash is king. Like cash really is king. So cash flow was certainly tricky at the beginning. I mean, I've especially when it was just me managing that along a couple of us doing that. Now we have a fantastic finance team in place, and they're very strong and they're great at managing that. And actually, an agency business is a good business for cash flow management, because you're selling your time and you have to receive that money in order to deliver your time. So it's a good model for cash flow management. But that is one thing that has always been tricky. I think growing a team is very tricky. Getting to a point like now we're a team of about 110 people, so it's a lot. And for me, challenges have been the ever evolving demands of my role, or maybe not demands, but sort of the expectations of my role.
Right.
And as new fantastic people join, which is what you're trying to do, you then are sort of kind of hoisted out of you may be doing a sales role, then all of a sudden you're taking that because there is a sales team who's far better at selling than you. Right. Okay, what do I do now? So it's always trying to figure that out. Right. And I found that definitely a challenge over the last year and a half, but I'm getting to grips with that. Right. Another challenge we have recently struggled with is the job market. It's hard finding talent.
Right.
There's a lot of opportunity out there. I don't know where it's come from, but there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah.
And I think people over the last year and a half, we, because of COVID, we've been living a certain life, and now the sort of world is changing again. I'd say like COVID is becoming less restrictive. People are traveling,
Yep.
people are going to work, people are realizing they're kind of going back to what life was like before. And they're now starting to think, hey, maybe I need a change. So not only do you have people starting to think, hey, I would like to look for a new job. I want to try something different, which completely understandable. It's also hard trying to acquire and bring in new talent to your organization. So that is really a challenge right now.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
I can imagine that. Are there certain things that you would say you would look for, or that individuals looking to get into the influencer marketing space and join agencies, and
mhm.
I would imagine they would need to have considerable experience like using platforms, right? And like
Yeah,
that's probably
hopefully,
the yeah.
yeah. I think yeah, I think if they want to look, what's been interesting is as we've grown our influencer marketing business, we've brought in people from more traditional forms of advertising where they
Hmm,
bring in client management skills and
gotcha.
processes that we were never aware of. So
Right.
that's been helpful. But I think if you're starting off your career and you want to get into influencer marketing, if you're joining at the executive level, which is sort of the first job within the sort of on the job ladder,
Yeah.
um, then yeah, I think you have to have a real passion for digital and social, and understanding of the influencer world, or as this other term, the creators.
Right.
Um, but demonstrating a passion for anything is really, I think, what someone should show. A passion and knowledge, probably. Maybe it's not just passion. I guess knowledge is important.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would imagine, staying informed in terms of like
Hmm.
what's actually happening in the space, right? Like which, and this is something that I wanted to ask you, like,
Mm.
with the evolution in the influencer marketing space, like, are there certain trends that either we are seeing now or that perhaps like we can expect to see down the road, that you think would probably stand out, or that you would want to sort of call out?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first one is that, influencer content is no longer limited to being activated on just one channel.
Yeah.
Um, Influencer content, the sort of the creative, like, when you see an advert on a bus or see an advert on television, that's what influencers produce. They create content. And so that content can be leveraged beyond social media and utilized across other platforms and other formats, such as television and such as buses. So, for example,
Mm,
we recently created and delivered a campaign for Vichy, which is a L'Oreal brand, where influencer content appeared in store across their CRM. So that's sort of email and newsletters, across paid media, social ads, um, on their e-retailers. So L'Oreal sell their products through other e-commerce retailers. So on their channels, it was included on digital screens in stores, wobblers in store. It was included across blogs, landing pages, and magazines. So essentially taking content and using it in a 360 approach.
right.
So that's really interesting. And then you'll see the platforms starting really to invest heavily in this to promote it. It's something we've been talking about for years and years, which is the combination of paid social with organic influence content. And by paid social, I mean when you're buying advertising space on the Facebook, on the social media platforms.
Gotcha.
And then organic influencer content is when we pay an influencer to create a piece of content and share it on their channel.
Right.
And now what's happening is we pay an influencer to create a piece of content, they share it on their channel, and then we put paid spend behind it to boost it even further,
Right.
amplify it, and take it out to specific audiences. So if we wanted to target a particular audience to buy a product, we would, and maybe it's through a direct consumer brand that owns
Yep.
their own website, selling product through that site. Um, we would use that. We would take that approach always, and it's very measurable as well because through social media platforms, pixels which you can install on the site, you can get uh, conversion
Stats.
results,
Yeah.
stats. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Taking this 360 degrees approach, where like you leverage multiple different platforms. You're doing blogs, you're doing, emails, you're doing all these different ways of reaching out.
Mhm.
Is that something that's become a necessity, or is that something? Because the way I would think about it is what
Mhm.
influencers perhaps would have done is they would have created this new way for brands to reach out to their audience, and perhaps given companies, perhaps taken spend away from some of those other sources of reaching out. So those blogs, those emails, and perhaps focusing entirely on these platforms where, like the TikToks of the world, like the
Mhm.
Instagrams of the world. So that hasn't happened. You still have to give importance to these other platforms to make sure that you reach the widest audience.
No, no, no. That is happening. There's a constant shift, just like you
Okay.
see,
Okay.
dollars moving away from television and going into digital. That
Yeah.
shift, there's a shift happening. But yes, all these different avenues serve different needs. Anyway, we're an influencer business, and obviously the best way to spend your money is
It's
through
through it's
influencers.
through influencers. And when it comes to the brands trying to figure out who the best influencers, is there like a ton of analytics that gets done? So like when you take a look at an influencer, I would imagine you would look at their followers, you would look at, do you look at their impressions, you look
Yeah,
at,
you look at their demographics before choosing them. So which audience they talk to, what's their if it's a TikToker, what's their average view count? You could even look at what's their average view count on sponsored videos versus non-sponsored. That's a mistake sometimes people make. They're like, "Hey, we're going to get you 20,000 views," um, and then they find that on the sponsored videos they typically only get 10,000 views. So
why would that be? Is it because the
um,
sponsored content doesn't resonate with their audience, or?
it could be that, or it could be they use hashtag ad and the algorithm of the platforms will downweight it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
more likely that. Um, but it can be a bit of both. Yeah. So you have to consider that. Um, I mean, so we have built our own software over the last 4 years. We have a software business called Companion,
Hmm.
which I don't know if you know about, and we sell it to third parties. And Companion allows influencers to authenticate um, a connection between their Instagram account or Facebook account, and now actually, I'm going to come on to TikTok in a second, and the Companion database. That then allows you to pull all of the private analytics that relate to those particular posts for that campaign. Also, TikTok has just enabled that feature as well, and they're launching something called the Creator API. And so we are going to one of the first few partners who get access to that information, which is exciting.
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
That's
it gives you quite a unique position in the market.
Yeah, that's awesome because you've got all of this analytics now and this big
Yeah.
data that you are now leveraging to back up what it is that you're doing. I think it makes all the sense in the world. Like
Mhm.
coming from sort of revenue management consulting, like which is heavily reliant on data,
Mhm.
and making sure that the decisions that you make are backed by numbers. I think like if you were to leverage that and have that information directly from the source, be it Instagram, be it TikTok, and then you're using that information to figure out like which influencers you want to connect brands with and how you want that content to even look and live. I think it's
Mhm.
brilliant. I think I would imagine that's probably the future of where this is heading, right? Or if people already
Def-
have started doing it.
no, no, definitely. And I think what's interesting is seeing all these financial institutions are now trying to build models
Hmm.
based off the data that businesses like ours could provide to them about how companies succeed on the stock market.
Yeah,
They're correlating that. They correlate as lots of different
variables.
considerations, but
Yeah.
one of them now is their influencer marketing approach and their social media presence, and who's talking about them on social media. So I think that's something we've received lots of requests about that. I haven't yet managed to figure out a way to make a business out of it, but there's something in that. So I saw that Chiara Ferragani, for example, one of the world's she's like an Instagram OG, one of the world's most successful influencers. She joined the board of Todd's,
Yep.
and their share price, I think, rose by 10% overnight.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Because she brings this entire audience of hers that she can then promote to, right? That she can then
Yeah,
market to.
yeah, and I think people recognize that Todd's must be rethinking its approach to marketing and its
Right.
approach to sort of product development, everything like that, and realizing that's what's going to be talking to these audiences that are now going to be purchasing their products today and in the future.
Yeah,
It's,
that's
a
interesting.
new wave of consumers coming through.
So I think if you were to, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but like if if you were trying to value an organization, right, and like perhaps an organization's future earnings potential, in this
Hmm.
particular case, like this person joining the board of directors, people clearly gave that a massive level of importance to the point where the share price jumped, right? Similarly, I think perhaps it would. I don't know if like this will eventually like show itself in disclosures that companies make, be it through their annual reports or their quarterly reports. But like maybe we might start to see organizations perhaps putting down their the importance that they give to influencer marketing, and perhaps like how that budget or that spend is allocated to influencer marketing to drive those views. I think we might start to see that. It could be something that perhaps like the market continues to give greater importance to, just because. So coming back to the actual success, and of course, like you're in the space, and clearly your rapid growth is an indication that you can do quite well, and the market is in fact growing, right? But like in
Definitely.
terms of like organizations that or brands that do bring influencer marketing in, I would imagine that the returns that they see are probably like higher versus other sources of marketing, right? Is that fair to
Yeah.
say? Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's a good comparison to make. What's interesting is when people ask us about influence, the last question they'll always ask, but they wouldn't ask their traditional marketing partners this,
Yeah.
is, oh, how are you going to prove direct return on ad spend? And I go, well, we can. If you have a direct consumer website, we can do that, no problem.
Right.
But if they're doing it just like they run any other sort of media, they will have their own methods of tracking that, and we can build our influencer model to be compared apples to apples with the other traditional forms of marketing. Um, look, influencer it's faster to create the content. It's far more cost effective, and the quality is better. There's much more diversity out there. We can find much larger range of creators, and not only do you get it produced, but then you get it also distributed to an audience that chooses to actually follow these people. It's not like an ad which just
Which just
pops up on
pops up,
television,
right?
which you don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to see. It's like an ad that's targeted specifically for you, and out
Right.
of choice. Again, it's a choice you make to see that. That's why you follow them.
Yeah, and I think that's why, and just me being so new to the social media space myself, like just having created an Instagram account just recently, people who, of course, I have been following or that I am aware of, when I do see their posts, I see the posts because I want to see them, right? Like you have that choice, like you have the ability to click on somebody's story on Instagram, it just doesn't pop up for you, right? So I think like in terms of like the model and the engagement, I would assume I would expect for the engagement with the audience to be a lot higher. If you were to use the influencer to the audience platform versus just have an ad that pops up to your phone, you're like, oh my god, like how can I forward this? Like how do I get done with this ad so I can continue watching whatever it is that I was watching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that makes total sense, and I think it's a good point that you make. It's going to be interesting to see how organizations bring this into start to give more importance and start to promote the fact that they do use influencer marketing. Um,
Yeah,
so there's of course like what this will do, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I'd like to
sure.
get your thoughts. Like what this would do is it would probably create a massive base of influencers, and we're already starting to see that take place just because the number of users on these platforms is growing, right? So I would imagine that a fraction of the increase in the number of users is just individuals who want to follow other sort of, and I'm just going to take the case of TikTok here,
Yeah.
right? So like if you've got people who are now uh, users of TikTok, a fraction of those people would want to be using TikTok just so that they are able to follow certain celebrities or people who they are fond of and who they want to be able to track their content of. But you would also have a fraction of people who would want to start creating content for themselves and see where that takes them, right? Because platforms like TikTok,
Yeah.
if your video goes viral, I would imagine that really gives you a level of exposure that you would never otherwise get, right? So I would imagine that what this continued trend in the growth of the market, what this will do is it'll start to create new and new influencers.
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
is there any have you given any thoughts on what that new type of influencer will look like in the future? Like, will they have certain skill sets? Will they be able to bring something to the table that perhaps we don't see right now? I would imagine that there'll be some sort of an evolution where, like, I would imagine influencer marketing agencies would be like, this is the next type of influencer that we should be
Yeah.
looking out for. Like, is there any?
It's a
What are your
really,
thoughts on
really good question. I don't think I've
that?
ever considered the answer to it. It's actually a great question. It's something I'm sure if I asked our team, they would be able to reel off a fantastic answer.
Yeah,
Uh, okay, so let's take a really boring example. Think about Instagram and
yeah,
then compare that to TikTok. And obviously, there are native TikTok creators and the native Instagrammers. For me, Instagram is about aesthetics and almost vanity.
yeah.
TikTok is like irreverent fun.
Hmm.
It's irreverent fun. So the type of creators that used to Instagram may have to completely evolve to succeed on TikTok and may never
Yeah,
be able to achieve that
yeah.
because it's a
Fair,
whole new form of content creation.
fair.
So, so I think there's an example of where it's changed. I don't necessarily know what the next changes are, but another
Right.
interesting thing that is discussed a lot, and potentially actually there is quite an interesting. I'll come on to something which I think is quite interesting, is virtual influencers.
Okay. Which
Like
is
people are now creating virtual characters who appear to be real people, but they're not actually real people, and they
okay.
build up a following pretending to be a real person they're not, and they're virtual influencers.
But is it like the virtual influencer? Is it like a cartoon? Is it like an animation? What does that look like? What is that? What is a virtual like?
So there's a famous virtual influencer called Lil Michaela,
Okay.
um, and it's an Instagram profile. It's like a CGI character.
Okay, it's a CGI
Um,
character. Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And now does she's become so incredibly successful
Yeah.
that she now does ads for the likes of Calvin Klein and Prada.
That's
Now,
insane.
I know it's insane. This is something which I think is actually even more interesting, by the way. So you should look up Little Michaela after this. Um,
Okay. I'll
but
do
I
that.
think a much more interesting. We work with quite a lot of fashion companies, and obviously sustainability is a big topic of conversation.
It's massive.
And
It's
yeah, and
massive.
like just shipping products to an influencer for them to post about, and sometimes they even then have to return them. Either shipping that product out, which sometimes they don't even care about, like gifting can be done and nothing even happens. But the shipping and the shipping back and forth, that costs a lot, and it's bad for the environment,
Yep.
obviously. So there are now tools which aren't quite they're not scalable enough yet, but they're coming,
Mm.
which allow a company like Calvin Klein to show an influencer virtually wearing their clothes. So like you or me on our
Right.
Instagram account could
Right.
use this filter to show me wearing the new Calvin Klein uh, boxer shorts,
Yep.
whatever.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um, so they don't send it to me. I don't actually need to have the product, but I could show my audience what it would be like. And I just think it's such an interesting innovation that is good for sustainability. It's good for the environment. It's a small win, but it's those little things that combined could be big.
Yeah, and I mean, for brands, it's a way for you to keep your costs down too, right? Like, to your point,
Yes.
exactly what you said. Like, there's that cost associated with shipping. Now I can just use a tool or some sort of a
Yeah.
software, where that allows me to. That's interesting. I wonder if the next phase of that would be, you just sign agreements with influencers and you're like, can I just use your like body and put
Mm-hmm.
like my products on it, depending of course on like what
Mm-hmm.
the brand is. But in this case, like if
Mm-hmm.
it's like a Calvin Klein or like a Prada or whatever that
Yeah.
clothing brand is, like for them to basically just reach some sort of an agreement with the influencer and say, hey, like let's sign an agreement, like let me like allow us to put our sort of clothing on you, and then like you can sort of promote it, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would
Yeah. Yeah. No. It
yeah,
is that's exactly the kind of thing that can happen.
yeah.
Yeah. I
So
think we would. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
wait, so I'm fascinated by the whole virtual influencer trend. Like, who would be responsible for developing the character? Just anybody? Like anybody can just develop a character that then gains a following? Like, how does one?
Yes, there are companies now that do it. So they're building up little armies of these virtual influencers. I actually, to be honest, I don't know enough about
It's
virtual
about,
influencers.
yeah,
I'd like to learn more.
yeah.
So I think it's worth doing some research into them. But Lil Michaela has over 3 million followers. In fact, I can check how many she has right now. One sec. Let's see how many she has.
That's mind blowing.
She has, she has over 3 million. Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, I'm also not surprised, right? Because if you take a look at like how big certain markets are, like if you think about like Twitch and how massive gaming is on Twitch, and then if you actually take a look at like the kinds of games that are popular on Twitch, like one would imagine for, if you were to take a character from a very popular game that a
Mhm.
lot of people are familiar with, and that is a very popular game. So let's say you take like Call of Duty, right? Or maybe that's not the best example, but let's assume you take like GTA, Grand Theft Auto, and you take
Mhm.
like the main character in Grand Theft Auto, and you build them like a social media, um um you give them like a social media platform. I would imagine that character would probably see a ton of would probably get a ton of followers as well, right? Like, is that fair to say? Like, you take an important, like a pretty popular character from any particular game, and you make a profile for them. I would imagine that would be a pretty decent.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely,
So
definitely.
yeah, I wonder if that's being done. That's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
it's
I'm sure it is.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if creators of those games were like, this game's been extremely popular, um, and people love it. Why don't we just take this character and make like a social media platform, like make a social media account for this particular character and see what happens? I wouldn't be surprised if some of those exist, and they're probably doing really well.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time, and I think for
Mhm.
influencers, I think they really need to be on their game, right? Because not only is there like an increase in competition when it comes to like the agency space, like the space that you play in, but
Mhm.
I would imagine there's a rapidly intensifying competition when it comes to influencers themselves. They're competing with
Mhm.
one another, right? For
Of
brands, like,
course.
so I think for them they would want to be on the ball as well, to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing to keep abreast of like whatever's happening in the market. And it's interesting what you said earlier, and I totally agree with you when you think
Mhm.
about like the new type of influencer, and perhaps like what skills that influencer might have. Like, you're exactly right. If you take a look at Instagram, the I would say that the main difference, and I agree with you, is Instagram is more like vanity, and then like we've got TikTok, which is more like just it's fun, right? And
Yeah.
but in terms of like the content format, like TikTok is all videos.
Mhm.
Instagram, the majority of posts, I would imagine, are probably images. Even though now it's stories, perhaps that's changed. I don't know, because you do see a lot of
Yeah,
like,
there's a big shift there, and I think the platform they'll be investing millions into Reels to promote that as a when they promote new features, they give you advantages in the algorithm if you use that feature. So, for example,
right,
on LinkedIn, if you're trying to promote this podcast once it
yeah,
goes live,
yeah.
and just in general, is you should be trying to utilize all their different features as often as possible in order to get promotion. So, uploading documents, trying all different forms of posts and regularly, and you'll benefit from that.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah, that's good for me to know. And then um, just one other thing that I would want to ask you.
Yeah.
Starting off in the influencer, or trying to eventually become a micro influencer,
Hmm.
what are some of the tips you could give to individuals who are like new into the game, like myself, and they're trying to create content, and they're trying to grow their following? Like, what one or two
Hmm.
pieces of advice would you give?
Start by making a plan,
Okay.
and then what's in that plan. I think you want to have. I guess it's probably not that different, but you don't need to really prep too much about this. Like, have some sort of mission, that your statement of some sort. So that could be, you could focus on just you could focus on entrepreneurs you need some sort of interesting topic that people are going to care about.
Yeah.
And then I think you want three topics that you're going to concentrate on, that feed into that mission statement.
Yeah.
and that will interest your audience. Post regularly,
Mm.
or post consistently, and try different formats, test and learn. Ultimately, like,
Yeah.
you're not necessarily going to know what works at first, but over time you're going to figure it out, and you're going to see what starts to work best for you. But I think you need to, just like starting a business, you need to have a belief in something
Yeah.
that is going to be successful. So I didn't know influencer marketing come about, but I remember thinking there was a power in these blogs, and it wasn't blogs ultimately; it was Instagram and YouTube, etc.
Yeah.
But I believed in the collective power of them and linking them to brands. I thought that was something was going to happen there, and luckily I was right. So I think you need to believe in something, and then you just need to pursue it, and don't give up, and accept that yeah, lots of things are going to change along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's great advice for anybody looking to do anything, right? Any type of
Yeah,
new venture, whether you're looking to become an entrepreneur or whether it's something that you are looking to tackle, like, you're part of the corporate world and you're looking to become an entrepreneur, right? Like for
yeah.
you, the advice still is relevant and still is important. Um, I think a lot of the things you said make sense, and I wanted to just come back to one point which I'm not particularly clear on. Like when you say post consistently, that just means staying active, right? Like there isn't any special formula, like in terms of how many times a day or how many days a week, or it
I
just
think there
be.
will be, yeah, no, there definitely will be formulas like post 3 times a day or something like that.
Oh, okay,
For sure, there will be, and you can.
okay,
There'll be lots of tips, and it will vary from platform to platform, types of posts, etc. But do you see what I mean? I think it was you. If you can stick to your weekly posting,
yeah,
choose every Tuesday, then your audience is going to get used to that.
right,
Just like back in the day, we always used to watch Friends on a Sunday evening,
yeah,
on
true,
Channel 4 in the UK. It's that
true.
same thinking, I believe.
Yep. No, I think it makes all the sense in the world. I know that you did have a long day, so thank you for taking the time to do this. It's always a pleasure having you on and connecting with friends from UVA. And it's exciting to see what you've been able to accomplish with Billion Dollar Boy. I'm sure
Thanks.
you guys will continue to kick butt and you'll continue to do well. I don't.
I
I
hope
think.
so.
I think you have the ability, I do remember seeing this actually when we were at UVA as well. You do have the ability to see, like where the market is moving, and
Mm.
because I do remember like when we were back in UVA, I remember you creating this page where you would have people post like the latest songs and like keep everybody sort of informed on like what's actually happening then, like just creating a
Yes.
platform for people to share their like music that they enjoy, right? And I remember that being extremely popular. I think you have the ability to do that, to sort of pick up on trends and to be able to execute. So I'm sure you'll continue to do well, and I will be watching on the sidelines to see what happens with Billion Dollar Boy.
Oh,
um
thanks.
Yep, and for everybody who is listening and who tuned in, again, thank you very much. We are starting off here. This is episode number 4, but we're going to keep this going. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, again, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. We're available on multiple different platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. So feel free to access this podcast however you like. Make sure you leave comments. Make sure you share it. And yep, this is Abdullah Khalifado, and I will see you on the next one.